probably in every country in Africa, if you're a bit privileged by your parents and have a private education, whatever, for some reason, you're pushed almost to always go to Europe or to go to the US to discover those places. And it's really during my professional life that I discovered probably my favorite place in the whole world, which is the African continent. Is being able to travel to all those countries and be able to actually discover all this art. So it's all this different journey that took me to create 154. I'm sure the art education and my father influence was there, but it's also the ability to work in a company to develop businesses for them that made me realize I could maybe create a different market for something completely new. And definitely my time in Africa made me realize and very observant of the creativity that existed on the continent that was not crossing over to Europe or to the US. And this is basically where I started I would say lingering a bit around, over weekends instead of coming back to London, or waiting for our next meeting, that was not coming up, and stayed on the continent in different cities and really being curious about the art scenes locally, and I think maybe it was also my art education and my father's background, that made me very curious about it.
Welcome to Third Culture Africans, the lifestyle podcast for dreamers, thinkers, and doers. We celebrate artistry, share stories from those brave enough to create something and succeed, listen to diverse perspectives on African success, and those shifting the needle on culture. I'm Zeza Oriaki-Sao, your host. Welcome to another episode of Third Culture Africans. My guest this week is one of Forbes' 2016 African Most Powerful Women. She is a great example of what it looks like to create a vision-led business with no compromises. She's an astute businesswoman, an incredible soul, and she's the founder of the 154 Contemporary African Art Fair. Please help me welcome to the show, Touria El-Glaoui. Hi, Touria, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Third Culture Africans.
Thank you, Zeze. Thank you for having me.
I think with the podcast, when I started, it was important for me to have guests that I not only knew, but also guests that I respected with what they've been able to do. I remember us meeting, I want to say in 2013 or 12.
Exactly, at the beginning of it all.
Yeah, 154 was literally a idea at the time. I remember us having, I think it was dinner at the George Club, and you were putting out this idea in terms of what you wanted to do. And at the time, it seemed in your mind, and I think, and in everyone else's mind, it seemed like a great project. But I don't think I would have imagined the magnitude or scale or size of 154 today, 6 years on.
It's true that in 2013 we were close to launching, but it was very clear in my mind. What was very difficult was to transfer that idea to people when I was trying to explain, how important it was and why the platform needed to exist. So in my head, building 154 was, a response to something that was not on the market, and I knew, this platform needed to exist. But since it had not done before, it was very difficult to see it, even for me, to have it, as a reality, and just imagine how it turned out to be, in 3 destinations. But it's true, 2013, if I could tell you that it would have been in New York, in London, in Marrakesh, I would have not believed it myself.
I don't think for me it was about not believing it. I think at the time, it was such a small space. African art or contemporary art in an accessible platform at scale wasn't done. And I think it wasn't something that you had the vision, which was very clear, and you knew exactly what you wanted to achieve. And for you, it wasn't just about making money. It was very much about being able to curate these stories of these incredible artists from across the continent, and how you wanted to do that, I think, was the key. I think you had a very clear idea on how you wanted to execute 154. And I must say that you've successfully done that.
Yes, and it's funny because we were saying just a bit before the beginning of the conversation of the different probably scenario that Imagine for 154. Where we are at today is definitely one that I'm really happy to be in, but I have not, really think that would be, where we were. I thought that when we started the project in 2013, there was a chance that it could be a flop, even if my idea was great, that, the execution and the fact that the interest might not be there or the audience might not respond positively to the project. I feel like, we were extremely lucky to have such a positive response, from the first year, to be able to double in size and, expand to New York 2 years later and expand to Marrakesh again 2 years after that. But I think the idea was in a way very bold, and I think I continued to be bold, with expanding, because I really felt, there was a need for it. And that feeling of like thinking I was right was also, I don't know how to explain it, stronger than my rational behavior, thinking that we needed to be in those places. It was very important for contemporary African art to have a voice.
You can come if you need to, or edit out.
Can I?
Yeah, you can go. Okay. They'll get edited out. I have a habit of jumping into, I guess, the work, because I feel like as entrepreneurs, we're most passionate about what we do as a start. And I find that it's a great way to just get you talking. And then we slowly ease into, I guess, the episodes. So the episodes get edited into, the narrative. But I usually like to get in like the core bits, what's happening, how you've grown, etc. But with regards to 154 and what actually 154 is, you say contemporary African art fair.
Yes.
But it's a little bit more than that.
Well, it is basically a platform that is responding to a lack of having contemporary African artists, in the narrative of international contemporary art, or even, I would say, art history, to be really much larger.
And consumer culture, right?
Definitely. And I think that, I was very proud to see on one of the articles that just passed on Artsy that we were part of the last decade movement in one way. But in a way, it is a proud moment to see that we've changed that decade by introducing contemporary African artists. It's very sad that it had to wait until 2010 to happen. But the idea of having, the possibility to give away to a really large number of artists who have like extremely talented professional, path or journey, that were not part of the international stage or part of the, the global narrative on contemporary African art, I think was very important. If we're able to just help a bit in terms of changing that narrative, I think 154 for me is a success.
I think you're being modest. It is a success. You run concurrently with Freeze.
Yes, in London and in New York.
Insane.
Well, it is, in a way, the only way we could do it at the beginning, because we didn't have a reputation or a name, or didn't have the access to all those collectors that were buying contemporary African art or could buy contemporary African art, because the idea was to create a market that was not yet there. Freeze seems to be, for me, one of this global, art fair attracting 70,000 people that I knew I could leverage on in terms of getting their collectors to give in a way, a bit of interest to what we were doing. And it worked really well in London. So I thought, let's replicate, the model in New York and do the same thing in parallel to Freeze New York. I think it was, good bets in general.
Strategic, or was it a bet?
I think it was a good bet strategically in terms of like choosing those specific dates. And now I feel like with time, we're obviously competing with the time of those collectors, as well. So they have so much things to do on their agenda that, we have to be better every year, which is a very good challenge for us. But like to attract this collector base, to come to us every year, because they have different options, So I think the difference with Marrakesh, where there's nothing around us and where we are basically the only only platform in February in a city that there's no other fairs. It's a whole different story. So all the collectors who are coming to see us are completely at our mercy, and they're there for us exactly. So the feeling is a bit different. But I think, for big cities like London and New York and people being so busy, it was great to be able to I would say, be part of a larger, art week, to make sure that, we were part of this circuit and this narrative that was happening at those moments in time, in those two cities.
Before we continue to move forward, I think we're all very much informed by where we come from. And I know that, you've recently lost your dad. So this is hopefully not going to be so emotional, trying to sort of dial you back into younger Touria and his influence in your life and your family. And what I found quite interesting, reading into for the episode, knowing that you're the daughter of an artist, and so your love for art would have probably been born from him, and you're also a daughter of a model. So, both your parents are quite creative in the sense that they had skills or talents in the art world. But finding out that your grandfather wasn't particularly keen on your dad becoming an artist.
Yes, so it's very funny, this whole story. You have to put back my grandfather in a context where he had a political position in Morocco, and
he was the Pasha of...
Yeah, he was the Pasha of Marrakesh, and it had a bit of a different probably connotation than now, because Marrakesh and Morocco in his period of time was very tribal
and traditional. He was like the chief, right? The king of the chiefs.
He was the chief of the south, so I don't know how to put it in any other way, but he had kind of like won several wars and several things, to
quite renowned,
to unify the south of Morocco. So he had the position of a pasha, but meant that the whole south was responding to him. And to be fair to him, he didn't know any other Moroccan artists who had made a career, out of that profession. So having my father being so passionate about painting, was quite new, and maybe it came with the first generation of teachers, coming to Morocco to teach, the young generation of Moroccans. And my father always talked about this teacher when he was 7-year-old, who taught him, the basic of drawing, and how that, first, openness to art was important to him. I mean, for us, it was still important because, as you know, in Africa, we grew up in a continent where there was not a lot of structure for art.
No. But we see it everywhere. The crazy thing is there isn't the structure, but it's such a core part of our daily lives, of our heritage. The teapots you drink out of are beautiful pieces, the tapestry, the furniture.
For sure, but in terms of art education, as I'll say, it's a bit insane that it didn't exist, but the reality is that I think if I had not been the daughter of an artist, this art education would have not been transmitted at that time,
Very true.
So I think basically, I would say that my first taste in art, came from my father, definitely through his art, but through also dragging us to museum when we would be abroad, and trying to him catch up on all the thing he was missing in Morocco, for his own inspiration, So I think that really played a role in probably, giving me a love for the arts in general. But I never thought it was a professional career. I thought it was a real passion, and that was basically it. But
can you imagine telling your granddad that you would now you want to create 154? Can you imagine him in the same time before your dad's success came in, having the conversation saying, "Hey, granddad, so I think..."
I don't think it would have gone really well, but because my dad was there first, maybe it would have been like,
a softer landing, maybe.
Yeah, he would have been like what to expect from my dad already wanting to study art so hard. I have no idea what he would have thought. He was also a very traditional man, so me as a woman also would have had another debate to go through with him.
Yeah.
But I know that, the fight was long, and definitely I was really impressed by my dad. Is like he had daughters who, not me, but my other sisters are quite creatives as well. And he was very against them studying art as well.
That's interesting.
Which is very interesting because he fought so much to go. You would have think he would have been with a more open mind.
But do you think that's because he felt like it was a hard journey for him and didn't want
that to be
and
he said it. He said it's a very hard journey. It was a very hard journey for him as I mean, I don't think it was a gender thing, but he said as a man, to support yourself, he's like, I want you to have some kind of like basic, education that would let you support yourself, without trying to be an artist. And so he pushed us to do studies that were completely probably not fit to what we really wanted to do.
This podcast is sponsored by Malay Natural Science. Malay's products are inspired by the rich landscapes, alluring scents, and ancient wisdom of Africa. Their luxurious fragrance and body care range balances 100% natural active ingredients and scientifically proven formulas to heal, protect, and pamper your skin. Malay ships worldwide, and you can buy their products at maleeonline.com. They also offer a free sample if you'd like to try.
I feel like that you bring that same empathy into the gallery representation at 154. Especially in the early days, you would speak so much about being passionate about helping the smaller galleries.
Yes. So it's funny because we had this workshop on 154 and, what was at the beginning, and obviously with the reputation and, the role we're trying to take, in this art world, we do have to develop into also a commercial platform. So because this is our main core business, but it's true that I think the role of such a platform is to give, light to a lot of younger emerging, galleries who have just started, and we're trying to do it, but in different format. It's not as easy anymore as it is from the beginning of 2013. For the unique reason is that the galleries on the continent are becoming more and more professional as well. Even if they're small, they have like a real tendency to know all about, being a gallery already and what they should do and their budget and things like that. So it's very useful for us, but at the same time, now we have to be very strict on quality, in a way. Yep. to pursue, what we are about. It's like we have to make a real criteria that, what will be shown at 154 will be, the best of what we can show regarding our continent.
But I feel like it's just being present in the marketplace, right? It's saying we are of the same standard as, say, a Frieze.
Exactly.
Because we run at the same time.
Exactly.
And why should our rules be any different?
Yeah. It's funny because I think because it's Africa, I don't know, but 7 years ago, they were really expecting us to play this role that this was a bit of a non-for-profit educational.
I remember having conversations with you and the frustration around that.
Yeah, but having people wanting a festival or some kind of a cultural event regarding Africa where they would learn about.
Which is a bit gimmicky, right?
It is gimmicky, and I feel like it is to the people who are not part of the African continent to start thinking of Africa as a completely different space than, what they had.
And in the same way they would study the education and history of other parts of the world, I think the continent deserves the same level of respect.
Completely. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of programs from the art education system, now including African, models, to their art history program. I've seen a lot of students, coming from all different backgrounds, wanting to do their thesis on contemporary African art. So there's definitely a strong interest from the new generation, and they probably don't see it as a separate, entity or something they have not seen. So I think that it is a movement that have started, and we'll see, probably less of a unbalance, I'll say, in terms of the art history and the inclusion of all those contemporary African artists in the next probably decade, I hope.
I think the platform does a great job of curating the continent stories, and you do a great job of curating a great picture of those stories coming out of every corner almost of Africa at the moment. But to delve into the inspiration, we've talked about being, a daughter of an artist, and your dad being one of the first really successful African artists to come out of the continent, and then going into deciding 154, post a career in corporate world. You studied in America.
Yes.
So hence your French American.
Yeah. I don't realize if I have still an American accent, that I might have a more American.
It kicks out now and again with something
British.
to do, especially when you do talks. It comes out, and I'm like, "Good, Touria." But the having worked in telco, because I feel like your entry back into the ecosystem of Africa, and I think this seems to be a running thread, and especially with me, that's what happened. I moved to South Africa, arrived in country, and I saw the gaps. I saw what was lacking. I saw that here we are in this beautiful place, and no one's appreciating what's around us. And in a similar way, going back to Morocco to work for, I think it was Siemens at Cisco.
It was exactly. With Cisco, I had the chance. It was really my first experience into, having to cover Middle East and Africa, and what it meant. It was like going and traveling a lot in Africa to sell different infrastructure solutions. So it was really my discovery of Africa as a continent.
Geek alert. You were selling infrastructure for Cisco systems in Africa.
Yes, I was. But I had, to be honest, a regional role. There was some techies, with me to ensure that I was not, overselling.
And so in a previous life, you were a consultant, management consultant. What was your previous
So basically,
career?
I started as a finance major, and I worked, I think my first job was in an oil company, if you want to know everything.
Yes.
But it was a very entry-level position, and that was between my bachelor and my MBA.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, oh my God, if I can only get to that level with my bachelor, I have to go back and do an MBA because I couldn't take the level of responsibility.
And this is all in the US?
That was in New York, yes. And then so I went back for an MBA in international business and strategic development. And my second job was in finance as well. So I did 1 year and a half when I was studying my MBA at night in a brokerage firm. So, the idea that I had a bachelor in finance, I don't know, led me to that opportunity. Not that I liked it, but it helped me took all my exams for finance, and in America to be able to deal in all the finance. Like here, you have a bunch of license, exams you have to have. And then I wanted to move up in the finance, corporate world and move into a new company that had a bigger reputation. And I went to private wealth for Salman Smith Barney, which I don't think exists anymore. And then, as every African, we have visa issues, so they couldn't renew my visa for some reason. And I think we were starting the crisis in 2001, that hit the internet, and, there was a lot of people being let go. So, their excuse that they couldn't renew my working visa. Yes. So I had to change and try to find another opportunity in Europe where I could work. And this is how I ended up in a telecom fund, who basically was covering, different emerging markets. Africa was one of them, but was more North Africa. And they had bought a company, in Morocco that they wanted me to go, help manage. So I was between London and Morocco quite a lot.
So you now become an infamous repat African.
I know. So they sent me back, but which was quite an interesting move. I remember as a woman in Morocco, I never thought, that would happen. But we acquired a company, and they put me a bit more senior than the people, we had there. And it caused a lot of trouble as me being a young woman, managing older Moroccan men. Yeah. But, it was a very good experience for me to understand if I wanted to go back to Morocco and have a professional career, that meant working for someone else, not... So it was quite interesting. And then for some reason, this telecom fund did not work out as well as, it was expected. It had a lot of hope, but it went a bit crushing down, I'll say. I switched and I moved to Cisco System. And this was for business development, position. And it was to, kind of help them develop some of the countries where they were not, in Middle East and Africa. So originally it was Middle East and Africa. And obviously when the two geographies became big enough, they separated them, and I moved to the African, geography. And it was very interesting because for me, it was really the time where I discovered, the continent back and forth. And it's funny because probably in every country in Africa, I feel a bit privileged by your parents and have a private education, whatever. For some reason, you're pushed almost to always go to Europe or to go to the US to discover those places. And it's really during my professional life that I discovered probably my favorite place in the whole world, which is the African continent, as being able to travel to all those countries and be able to actually discover all this art. So it's all this different, journey that took me to create 154. I'm sure the art education and my father influence was there, but it's also, the ability, to work in a company to develop businesses for them that made me realize I could maybe create a different market, for something completely new. And definitely my time in Africa made me realize and very observant of, the creativity that existed on the continent that was not crossing over, to Europe or to the US. And this is basically where I started, I would say lingering a bit around, over weekends instead of coming back to London, or waiting for a next meeting, that was not coming up, and stayed on the continent in different cities and really being curious about the art scenes locally, and I think maybe it was also my art education and my father's background, that made me very curious about it. But I definitely had my first, I guess, art crush during my Cisco journey,
Oh, wow.
in terms of like going there, like discovering art, buying art, coming to London, having no view of what was going on or what I had seen in Africa where I was living, so I didn't really understand how those artists could be so good and not, have a presence, in the international market. And in parallel to that, this is another little, drop that happened, that maybe, really maybe give me another push to choosing to launch 154, is I was working on my father's catalogue raisonné, which is a bit of a lifetime project, but it's kind of like regrouping all the work that an artist did in general.
And this was the project with Leighton House?
So this is an ongoing project, by the way. It's not finished, but it's, I was working on that and like putting an exhibition on my father's work, between his work and Winston Churchill in London. And this helped me in many ways, getting access to the art world and really having a glimpse of what it meant to work, or have relation in London in the art world and how well I could do or not do. So when this idea started, getting into my head that we should do a platform for contemporary African artists, I had also this experience in London with my father's work and doing an exhibition in a museum that I really enjoyed. And I was like, okay, maybe this is not such a bad art industry to work in. And there might be more work to do in terms of understanding, if there's a business model that would work, to do that. And if it existed, because I had no idea if, such platform existed already.
I think very few people on the outside see that some of these things are usually just ideas. And it's usually a question, what if? And then you go ferreting away at this idea that ends up becoming something. And that seems to be a common thread in each episode with everyone, because everyone asks the question, why not? Or what if we did it this way? Or why isn't, you just meant, why aren't these artists being recognized? And there's something in it about, because everyone's understanding, especially the narrative of entrepreneurism or entrepreneurial ventures at the moment in our conscious culture is very much about, hey, have a strategy, think about a problem, do all these different things. And your job with 154 now is not just a job. And our responsibility as African entrepreneurs pushes us beyond the scope of a job or making money. The responsibility of carrying, at the moment, the continent's visual stories to the rest of the world. I don't know if you've ever contextualized what 154 is in our ecosystem.
So listen, I do, and I think it's important, and I really feel like we have a responsibility of educating at the same time as we are, providing this commercial platform in other business and other art fairs in the world. Maybe their first objective is to make money, and do a business that actually is profitable and that work, and they have maybe one objective. It's like, how do you make your fair relevant and invite all those galleries and, have a revenue from it. With the continent, it definitely gave us a whole different set of responsibility and weight, because for the only reason that platform for a lot of those artists was going to be the first time they would be exhibited internationally. It has also been the first time they had something published about them, or a catalog telling their biography or things like that. So we had to do all those elements surrounding the fair with this education at the same time as, we are a commercial platform, to the point where we often have to remind people that it's first a commercial platform.
Yeah.
And then it's a not-for-profit or educational, program at the same time. But
I remember the Kickstarter for the catalogue.
we had a terrible year.
I remember the Kickstarter. I remember the printer. I remember.
We had like a lot of stories. I think what you have to remember is that when you're an entrepreneur, you go into those things very blindly. You can be prepared with the business model.
If someone told you, would you do it?
Sorry?
If someone told you the outcome,
you wouldn't do it.
You probably would do it.
No, you probably would have different thoughts about it, but you wouldn't do
You'd be like, maybe not this then.
Not this thing, yeah. And the Kickstarter was one of them. We had a terrible year, and it was about terrible year in raising sponsorship.
Yeah, I remember one time you kind of said to me, oh my God, so all I'm doing is trying to raise money.
Yes. And to be honest, believe it or not, you would think that after 7 years it becomes easier. It's still the same scenario about raising sponsorship. Every edition or every year, I would say, of the fair, you come from hero to zero. You have to start it from scratch. And a lot of it, comes to the fact that, we are a very specialized art fair. We are, specializing in Africa. So some of our partners are African as well. Some of our partners don't care about art. Some of the partners care about Africa, but not about art. We have all those mixtures of people, that makes us a bit different than, I guess, very international event, where you have a larger pool also to knock on doors to. I think that the fact that we're very focused on Africa, I think, in many ways, we are dealing with people either who have investment in Africa, might be interested into investing or getting visibility, or African who have or should have some kind of in a way, responsibility in wanting to support, an African event. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it's not straightforward.
Never is. I think your earlier investors, if I remember right, were from the Middle East.
Yes, to be fair, my first bank sponsor was a Moroccan bank, but they sponsored me as an entrepreneur, not as an art, event. They wanted to give me seed money for, an entrepreneurial idea. Yeah. And then second year, which was a terrible year because I didn't know if I was going to get sponsorship until the last minute. And this is why we did the Kickstarter, because we didn't want to stop doing the catalog, which was really a really big cost for a startup, without really any return for 154. And it worked, but it was such a journey.
No one knows how much printing costs a catalogue.
Yes, so the printing a catalogue is very expensive, and thank God we're going into a digital world, because just for the catalogue we had to find, I think, £12,000.
Wow.
For not so many catalogues. Now we're talking 1,000 catalogues. So I know that it doesn't sound such a astronomical figure, but when you're an entrepreneur, it is
12,000.
Yes,
12,000 is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. This is what I'm saying.
Even £50 is a lot of money.
It is.
Some months you get to that £50 difference.
Yeah,
it really stings.
And I'm telling you, this was something that you give to the VIP.
Yes.
That are not often bought, from you. So it's really a giveaway, that.
£12,000. Here you go.
Yeah, here you go. And I'm like, But anyway, we managed to get that Kickstarter going, but it was painful to have to go there. I don't know. It was almost I thought that the first year was successful, so the second year was, going to be easier. So that, that realization that you still needed to raise money and sometimes even go to Kickstarter to raise, £12,000 because you didn't have them. They even look good. It didn't even look good for the galleries to know we're in that type of trouble.
I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, on my part, I thought that was another bold move of yours. I thought it was incredibly bold to kind of step out of the space and go, hey, you might think that I'm this big shot, but I need to print my brochures. I remember the email that came around, which was, help us print our brochures.
Yeah, the catalog.
Yeah.
We targeted everyone we knew. Mm. And honestly, the bid on that exercise were sometimes very slow. It went £10 to £50 to £30, but at the end of the day, it worked.
And you were searching for printers everywhere, Portugal, everywhere.
So we learned as well, because the first year we printed in London, which is crazy. And we had a designer in London who helped us develop our brand image, which was very important because at the end, this is something that, people remember. And when I think about it now, this investment was not for nothing. We still use our logo. It's still relevant.
I think that's a key thing. A lot of people forget that.
Yeah, you
at the
try to
start
go
of a
for the
business.
cheap option in many ways because this is also the only sometimes, solution you have. But at the end of the day, I remember having this budget from this bank, which was a small sponsoring budget. It was £50,000. But this is the only seed money I had. You have to remember that. It was that and that's it. So when it came to basically sharing this between the PR, doing your brand identity and thing, I chose to put the maximum in the brand.
I did the same.
Yeah.
I literally spent every single thing I had on the brand identity. And then I had to raise the money to actually even make the products in the end. It was like,
at least you had the name and you had a brand.
Literally, I had a brand. But I think at the time, the foresight to be able to invest in that, and I didn't know how far it will take you. And I think in the beginning, you don't know. But I think the foresight, looking at 154's branding now and how distinctive that is, and when it's time for 154 in the year's calendar and seeing the posters, or even going to Marrakesh and seeing the posters, there's something warming about that because that investment is lifelong. I remember my first office that I ever rented in London, and it was from the guy who had designed the Schweppes logo.
Yes.
And in the olden days, he was, I wouldn't say smart enough not to take a one-off fee for the logo. So every time Schweppes print a bottle, a can, he gets paid.
Amazing.
And I remember meeting this guy. And I think from that meeting is when the branding idea stuck to me, which was, I need to own my logo. I need to own my IP in whatever way that I can. And I think the same with your approach with 154. And I guess, did that come from having your background career-wise, or having your dad and having an artist and seeing sometimes the struggles that artists go through with people essentially ripping off their work?
So I think, one thing I think I did right early at the beginning, definitely not raising money, enough money, but it was to surround myself with a good advisory board. And I think that was very important because there was a mixture of people, people who have been in business, all type of businesses for years, but and had the wisdom of the old age, and you had also people in the art world, but in different part of the art world. And I think it was, when we had those first meetings of like, this is where we are, what I'm going to do with this, etc., that we all agreed that, branding was important. And I remember I had the first idea to go into a logo context with like a younger designers, who could do for much cheaper, the logo. But, I had also people in this board telling me, no, like if you're going to have a logo, just think about it, think that maybe everything goes later, but your brand stays. And
it's an exorbitant cost considering you hadn't even sold the ticket.
That's exactly it. And I mean, to be honest, like it was very nice to hear from all those advisory people, but they were not in my shoes every day.
With £50,000 and
I know, and like being struggling and things, and not seeing how I'm going to pay my, part-time employees and things. So there was like a lot of calculation that for them was very easy to make, but for me to live them
huge
every day were much difficult. Yeah. But to be honest, now with a bit of, of time, they were right. But, they could have told me, maybe have a great designer, but not from London, and trying to do it somewhere else.
I feel like these are the school fees we pay in this journey. Like there are things where if you go back to yourself in 2013 and your 2013 self says, hey, Touria, so I'm going to do it this way. You'll be like, don't you dare.
100%. Even like, expenses we let ourselves have, not having, different estimate, but mistakes of, I guess, entrepreneurs, like I always remember going in New York, not knowing the landscape, in New York. So like the people building your walls, the architects, and everybody was trying to get a piece of you. You don't know it, but like,
And they all need it. And you need these things. They're selling you stuff constantly.
You're selling the stuff, but because you're also in some kind of a rush because you don't have the time
and you're desperate.
to really do research or have the best, estimates in front of you, you make like wrong choices of like.
But do you find that you're also not bold enough to actually? In the beginning, I certainly wasn't bold enough to go, actually, no, thank you, I don't need you.
Well, the problem with a production event like we are building is like we often rushed with time, so it's all about getting things done at a certain deadline. And unfortunately, this is what made us make mistakes. If we had more time, in some cases, we would have been, much more rational about our choices sometimes, and maybe more due diligent in terms of, the people we chose to work with, etc. We realized it really fast, but the following year, when we got other estimates, and we're like, what? We paid, 3 times what we're supposed to pay. This is ridiculous, And the people wanted to still work with us, and we had to show them the other estimate. I was like, was that a joke?
Are you kidding me? Like, what is this?
And they, it's funny because like confidence in those situations helped. They didn't budge in terms of like, we'll give you a huge discount to continue to work.
It's like the disparity between quotes. Sometimes you find it insane.
It's crazy.
It's like you can, for the same job, you can get anything from like £80 to £2,500.
I really don't understand it. It's like almost unfair. But at the same time, if some people like us at the first year were willing to go for the highest estimates, why not? They might need less clients,
So while all this is happening, you make Forbes 2016 Africa's Most Powerful Women list.
Yes.
Do you remember that list coming out and exactly where you are in business? Because sometimes the thing about press, and we were talking earlier about, press and what comes with the articles and speaking at TED, the reality of the day-to-day, especially when those articles come out, for me, the timing is really odd because I'm not at the high when the article comes out. Was it the same with you?
To be fair, there's a bit of knowledge. I mean, I would like to know. I'll be like, oh, surprised. The one thing that surprised me is something that happened very early on 2 weeks ago. But those, listing, one way or the other, the people asking you a lot of questions, want a biography, they tell you exactly why is it for. You're not always sure about the timing of it, but you kind of know it's going to come out. So it's just you kind of forgot about it. And then it's kind of a good news. But you're right. There's definitely... It really feels like a parallel universe where you get, all those accolades and then you're like still in your struggling of every day as an entrepreneur. So maybe the first time around, you're kind of proud. You're like, oh yeah, great.
Yeah, you send it to all your friends.
Yes, and you're like so excited. And you're like, oh, I'm like, and then you're like, what does it actually bring me?
It's like sometimes you get those emails about, please, would love to do an article about you. And there's a part of me that wants to go, yes, I'd love an article, but why am I going to waste my time answering these questions?
Yes, and sometimes, you had the art also journalists asking you to a lot of questions, and then you see the article and you have one line, like one quote.
Yeah, and you probably spent like a good hour.
To try to answer that question, yes. But I think, in a way, somebody told me to look at it a different way, said, like, it's better that you have positive press
Very true.
than negative press,
Very true.
or no press at all.
Very true.
So in a way, I should be grateful.
But there are times where there's no press, right?
Yes, to be honest, I think press helped us in many ways in getting credibility, in giving us a bit of gravitas, in terms of our reputation. So we needed it. And I mean, to be honest, those accolades for me were extremely helpful to be able to be called to give a voice to artists from the continent. So that what it helped me do personally is be called for conferences, be called for this, for that. And I mean, I've realized when I turn down some opportunities because at the end you can't do them all, it's that in those panels, there's no African voices, know. So it's also when you were talking about responsibility, sometimes like I'm exhausted that, but it's an important art panel. And I know if I'm not going, this topic is not going to even be part of the conversation. So you have to make an effort and go. But I think all this press, I guess in a way, visibility and for your brand and for what you do is very good. It's very good if you're allowed to, fulfill some kind of mission with it. And I think, TED came out probably from, one of those article, as well. Somebody saw the article, somebody, tried to understand more about 154.
I always say purposeful work. I think we and especially 154 is purposeful work.
For sure. Yeah, it's a good expression.
Yeah, and it seems to be the running thread actually with every guest that we're all doing purposeful work and creating conversation in a space that otherwise were overlooked or otherwise not the level of attention is being paid. And I think through 154, you have been able to create an income stream for a lot of people. There are young people who believe now that they can have art as a career from our part of the world, which is incredible. I remember as a child, the idea of an artist was they were struggling and they were poor. And, to sell their work, they would have to, haggle. You'd see people haggling to sell work. And you've been able to create a platform that allows them to understand that they can be sold in Sotheby's or Christie's and alongside Frieze and have collectors who appreciate their work from all around the world.
I definitely think, and I hope, we have this impact, and that a lot of artists, sometimes we go, it's artists we didn't even had a chance to present yet, at 154 because they're younger, because they don't have representation yet, but they've heard about 154, as their journey or their goal or, where they are aiming, to be. And so this, we're definitely very, very proud. We need, more structure on the continent, as well. And this is definitely something that I will reiterate every time I can, because there's a lot of work to be done, there. And I almost want to say now that, coming to 154, it's almost the end of your journey. You have so much step to struggle with, before getting, to a gallery that will see your work, and then come to 154 and have the means to do 154. So I want to say that, the spaces, the support, the curators, all this is like an ecosystem that is really well developed outside the African continent, that we all need to put a lot of efforts in doing the same thing, on the continent. Not automatically the same, models, because we don't have to repeat, things that don't work for, the different countries. So, for example, I'm not for, museum in every city or in every country, not at least the old model of the museums, because I think in some cases, there's no point of it. People are not used to go to museum, know, so I think that, I would prefer, different art centers that bring all the creative communities together, would be much more useful.
And which is more akin to a way of life, right?
Yes, and I think that and it's a bit of our problem, us as African, is always trying to look up and trying to copy models that already exist, where we have to develop our own models. And this is also, I think, what I would, try to encourage people to do is try to find models that works for you. And the continent, unfortunately, has models that need to work for it, because we usually don't have the capital, we don't have the structure, we have a lot of talent, it's how do you bring all those talents, as much you elevate all those talents.
Yeah. So the idea of a young artist who might listen to this episode, photographer, artist, who has 154 as a goal, your advice is find a gallery, get seen. What's your advice for that person?
So my first advice is please get as much information that you can on what you're trying to do, because I receive a lot of emails from artists, from, different players in the art industry on the continent. And sometimes, the emails are at 154. So they obviously got to go to the website, got my email, got, the info email, but they obviously did not get what we are about, So sometimes, you receive, really look at my work, or something like that, which is fine, and very daring and bold. But if I would receive an email, differently narrated, that is more engaging, even if it's not our job, but the work was really good, presented in a really good way, and explaining, some kind of an idea of what they were trying to achieve with their work, I would definitely look at it more. But I would say the first most important step for anybody in the art world is get as much information as you can on what you can do, what is available to you. And I'm saying that because nowadays there's a lot of residency for artists all over the world that could, welcome African artists.
Yes.
But if you don't do your own research, nobody's going to do it for you, So the first step is definitely do your own research, because this is very, very important. So if you have access to your phone, which most of Africans do, with a bit of internet, it's something that, you could do. The next step is definitely galleries are hard to find. Mm-hmm. They're not an easy commodity in Africa, so I would say use your social media, because a lot of artists have been discovered on social media, have a wonderful Facebook page, an amazing Instagram, share your work, try to, target and tag people that might be of interest, also understand the galleries and the work and the list of artists they have, because sometimes it's all about the fit, it's not about trying to target all your galleries. It's like targeting the one that, represent artists that are similar to you, that, they have the same theme or the same ambition that, you have. And I feel like if I was a young artist today, I would definitely try to use all the resources that is available to me. Yeah. And residency is the first step, just because you can meet curators, directors, other artists there that will share their experience, share their, the next step, of their career, and, how they did it, and share their experience.
With you. And you touched on this, but African woman, 40s, single, running 154. When are you finding a husband?
This is like a very African question. I should introduce you to my aunt.
But this is a narrative, and I find a lot as female entrepreneurs, if you're not in a marriage or in a relationship that is out there or publicly known, at home, you're getting these sorts of questions. And then it's, the question of don't get too big so that you don't find a husband, and then you get those bits. And I think we're now a new generation of women who are doing it slightly differently.
We are, to be honest, like partnership and partners, could be a very good help in an entrepreneur, career and support system, as well. I didn't have that, not by choice, like you have to meet the right person in general. But I think it gave me maybe the courage to be more bold, in my choices, to be able also to concentrate and maybe give my all to the project, rather than, having a family to take care of. I mean, I'm very admirative of, all the women like you, who have a family and a daughter.
It's insanity, by the way.
Yeah, it is. But she might be one of your first, your biggest fan, as soon as she'll understand how hard it has been for you to have her, and sharing your desk at the same time.
She has a mini podcast episode that she recorded the other day. It was quite hilarious. And she was like, And I think, though, in our African perspective, and the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of the time, people see women at the forefront of a business and assume that there has to be a man, or there is, privilege from your background. And it's helpful, I think, for people to understand that sometimes, regardless of that privilege, you started with £50,000, which was a grant from a bank, which you had to apply for, which you had to fill out forms for, which you had to compete for in essence. And I think sometimes it's an excuse that's being used by women and our peers that actually I can't do it because, and you're a great example that you can do it, and it is possible, and you can do it at scale, have one of the biggest, or the biggest African art fair in Europe, North America, New York, and now Marrakesh.
Yeah. What do you want me to say? I think it's also personality. There's people who are, more into procrastination. How you say? Maybe I'll use another name because I don't know how to pronounce this one. But they're more about thinking what they could have done or not done. Or there's some people who are much more comfortable with risk than others. Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, a real personality character trait rather than
But were you conscious of the risk?
Of course, I was conscious of the risk. And to be fair, I think we talked about it before. I thought that journey was very lonely, the 2 years,
incredibly lonely.
To launch the fair, because you really believe in something, but there's no reference to it. Mm-hmm. And there's no nobody bouncing ideas with you, about what you want to do, and you think you're right, but like at the same time, people are thinking, you're very ambitious.
What are you doing? Who's going to turn up?
Yeah, who's going to be your audience? You sure there's a market? Like, you already have all those doubts, to be honest, somewhere inside.
And then having someone echo that sometimes
all day long. So I mean, if I could do it differently, I might have not done what I've done, but I would think that it's easier with a partner, because you're not two to believe in something than alone.
But we've also seen bad partnerships.
A good partner is important. Yeah. Maybe somebody you think with the idea or something, so you're both committed to the same goal. So just so that journey is a bit less,
tasking.
And I feel like if I could change, how I did it, I would have loved to have company in that,
Agreed.
lonely journey, at the beginning.
Hopefully Third Culture Africans gives someone in that lonely space a companionship with our voices, and also the ability to know that what they're experiencing is not unique.
Exactly. So that's a very good idea, because I wish I could have heard all those stories, before starting. So if this is giving you the possibility to read, and I love that. I love to read, biographies on people I admire. This is one of my favorite things, and probably my favorite topics of books, is like reading, incredible stories on people, I've seen or admired for a long time. And I think that, in a way, the podcast is like, the new, books in many ways.
I'm hoping that this allows anyone who's interested in the art space, who wants to build things, gives you the opportunity, or gives them the opportunity to be able to hear your story, hear your journey. There's one thing I do on every episode, though, which is have each guest say their name properly. Because as a third culture kid, we all have versions of our names that is not our name. So how do we say your name properly?
So in my household, it's Touria El-Glaoui.
Okay. And to the rest of the world, Touria El-Glaoui.
Exactly. I have a lot of Touria or Victoria sometimes, because I don't know, like it sounds a bit the same. In Arabic it's Thureya, so I'm also like called Thureya in Morocco, by the Moroccan administration.
Yes.
But I had a French mother, so she didn't know how to pronounce this in Arabic, so it became Touria, and this is how at home I'm called,
Oh, wow. Well, Touria, thank you so much for coming on this episode of Third Culture Africans. I've been smiling so much throughout the episode, my cheeks are sore, but I've absolutely enjoyed sitting with you.
Well, thank you, Zizi.
Can you tell our listeners how they can find you, how they can experience 154, and so they can visually understand what we've just talked about?
Yes, so definitely the website. So it's www.1-54.com, and Google 154. There's a lot of videos, interviews, of the fair itself. And if you're physically in Marrakesh in February, so it's from the 20th to the 23rd of February. And later on in May in New York, and then in October 2020 in London. But all the dates on the website, all our, programs are there, all our past archive are there. I heard that we don't have a very clean website these days, and it's not sustainable, because we're keeping all the archives, for everyone to be able to refer to them,
but
when
that's
they
a
want
great
to.
experience for someone who just discovers 154, and a great education. And if they turn up, they'll get a catalogue?
For sure. But, we're going more and more digital. So I don't know how long it will be for a real catalog. But there's a real tendency to try to do what we can, to be more sustainable. So we definitely will have a catalog, but it might soon be just a digital catalog. We might have 2020 still going on, but I'm hoping that 2020...
limited edition shout out.
But we're hoping that there will be collector's item very soon, because we're trying to all save a bit the planet. So, trying not to print too much, it's not a bad idea.
Great. Well, thank you so much for such an inspiring episode. And I hope a young person out there who has a dream and who is inspired by doing purposeful work in a space that seems magnanimous listens to this episode and draws a level of inspiration and courage to make a step. Thanks, Touria.
Thank you, Zizi.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Third Culture Africans, the Lifestyle Podcast. We would love to hear from you. So please find us on Facebook or Instagram at Third Culture Africans and leave us a comment. A review goes a long way in getting our show noticed, so please leave us one if you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time.